There's a pattern woven through Scripture that most believers never notice. Not because it's hidden, but because we've been trained to read the Bible like a history book instead of a living blueprint. I found it during a season when my future felt like a locked room with no key. What I discovered wasn't numerology or mysticism. It was something far more unsettling. The Bible doesn't just record what happened to ancient people. It encodes what's about to happen to you. The question isn't whether your future is written. It's whether you know how to read it. 3 years ago, I was stuck in a cycle I couldn't name, but couldn't escape. Every door I walked through seemed to lead back to the same room. Different faces, different cities, but the same spiritual climate, the same inexplicable resistance, the same pattern of almost breakthroughs that collapsed at the last second. I kept asking God why my future felt like it was buffering, frozen on a loading screen that never completed. Then someone handed me a worn Bible and said something that sounded insane. Stop reading it chronologically. Start reading it autobiographically. I didn't understand until I did. See, we've been taught that the Bible is a linear timeline from Genesis to Revelation, a historical document about people who lived thousands of years ago. But what if it's something else entirely? What if it's a spiritual algorithm, a divine code that maps every season, every struggle, every transition the human soul will ever experience? Think about it like this. Imagine your life is a song and the Bible is sheet music. Most people read the sheet music as if it's a story about someone else's performance. But the notes on that page, they're not describing what happened to David or Joseph or Ruth. They're describing the melody your life is currently playing. Every biblical narrative is a prophetic template. When you're in the wilderness, betrayed, isolated, questioning everything, you're not randomly suffering. You're in an Exodus season, and there's a specific prophetic pattern encoded in that story that reveals exactly what's coming next. The problem is we read Exodus as history instead of recognizing it as a mirror. I started doing something radical. I stopped asking God to show me my future through visions or prophecies. Instead, I asked Him to show me which biblical pattern I was currently living inside. The moment I did, everything clicked into focus. I realized I wasn't stuck. I was in a Joseph season, betrayed by people I trusted, thrown into a pit I didn't deserve, falsely accused, and waiting in a prison of circumstances that made no logical sense. But here's what shifted everything. Joseph's story doesn't end in the prison. It ends in the palace. The code reveals that betrayal isn't your destination. It's your preparation. The Bible doesn't predict your future like a fortune teller reads tea leaves. It predicts your future by showing you the archetypal pattern you're currently walking through. Once you identify the pattern, you know what's coming next. Not because you're psychic, but because God already wrote the script. When I recognized I was in a Joseph season, I stopped fighting the pit. I stopped resenting the people who threw me in. I started asking a different question. What is this season developing in me that the palace will require? And that's when the prophetic prayer emerged, not a prayer asking God to reveal the future, but a prayer asking Him to reveal which biblical template you're currently inside. Because once you see the pattern, the next chapter becomes obvious. Here's the mystery most miss: your future isn't hidden from you, it's hidden in you. Encoded in the very story you think you're just randomly living. The struggles you're facing right now, they're not chaos, they're chapters. And every chapter in your life has already been written in Scripture, waiting for you to recognize yourself in the text. The prophetic prayer isn't about unlocking secret codes in verse numbers or finding your name hidden in Hebrew letters. It's about asking God to open your eyes to see which story you're inside. Because the moment you recognize the pattern, you stop being a victim of your circumstances and become a prophet of your own next season. You're not lost. You're just reading the map wrong. We've been lied to about what the Bible actually is. Churches teach it as ancient history, stories about people who lived thousands of years ago in deserts and kingdoms we'll never see. But that's the surface reading, the one that keeps Scripture at arm's length, safe and distant. The truth is far more invasive. The Bible is autobiographical, not their autobiography, yours. Every story in Scripture is a spiritual prototype, a prophetic template that human souls cycle through across all generations. When you read about David running from Saul, you're not reading history. You're reading your own life during seasons of unjust persecution. When you read about Ruth choosing loyalty in the face of loss, you're seeing the blueprint for your own widowhood seasons, whether literal or metaphorical. This is why certain passages suddenly come alive during specific seasons of your life. It's not coincidence, it's recognition. Your spirit is identifying the pattern you're currently inside. The Bible isn't predicting your future through mystical codes. It's revealing your present by showing you which archetypal journey you're walking. Once you see which story you're in, the next chapter becomes prophetically clear. The reason your life feels chaotic is because you haven't identified the pattern yet. You think you're experiencing random hardship, but randomness is a myth in the kingdom. Every season has a structure, a biblical template that's been walked before. Are you being falsely accused and abandoned? That's a Joseph pattern. Are you in the wilderness after a massive deliverance? That's Exodus. Are you waiting for a promise that seems to delay year after year? That's Abraham's journey. Are you being refined through fire and nobody understands? That's Job's template. The prophetic prayer begins with this question: God, which story am I inside right now? Not which story do you want me to be in, but which one am I actually living? Because once you identify the pattern, you gain prophetic sight into what's coming. If you're in Joseph's pit, you know the palace is next, but only after the prison of testing. If you're in Exodus wilderness, you know the promised land is ahead, but only after the giants are faced. The pattern doesn't just predict your future, it prepares you for it by showing you what this current season is developing inside you. Joseph's story unlocks something most believers miss. Betrayal isn't punishment, it's positioning. The pit wasn't random cruelty, it was directional. Every place Joseph was thrown into, the pit, Potiphar's house, the prison, was removing something from him that the palace couldn't afford. The pit removed his naivety. The false accusation removed his need for human approval. The prison removed his timeline. By the time Pharaoh called for him, Joseph wasn't the arrogant dreamer his brothers sold. He was a man who'd been emptied of everything except God's presence. This is the code. What you're experiencing isn't destroying your future, it's customizing you for it. The people who betrayed you didn't derail your destiny, they unknowingly delivered you to the next level of it. The injustice you're suffering isn't evidence that God forgot you. It's evidence that what's coming requires a version of you that can only be forged in the fire of betrayal. When you recognize you're in a Joseph season, everything shifts. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this preparing me for?" The palace is already written. You're just in the refining chapters. Most people pray the wrong question. They ask God, "What's my future? Where am I going? When will things change?" These prayers keep you stuck in uncertainty because they're asking for the end of the book before you've understood the current chapter. The prophetic prayer is simpler and more powerful. God, show me which biblical story I'm living inside right now. Not the story you wish you were in. Not the story that sounds glamorous. The actual pattern your life is currently mirroring. Because the moment you see it clearly, the fog lifts. You stop feeling lost and start feeling located. You're not wandering, you're in Exodus chapter 16, and you know chapter 17 is next. This prayer shifts you from victim to prophet. You are no longer passively experiencing your life. You're actively reading the map God already provided. The Bible becomes a mirror, and your circumstances become confirmations of which template you're walking through. And here's the mystery: once you align with the pattern instead of fighting it, the next chapter accelerates. You stop resisting the wilderness and start extracting everything it's meant to develop in you.